the heart of Burkina Faso. The sun, a brazen eye in the noonday sky, glared down on Ouagadougou. Yet within the presidential office, a profound hush reigned. President Ibrahim Traore sat at a simple desk, its plain with a deliberate contrast to the pomp typically adorning such a space. Sunlight knifed through the blinds, etching bars across the gleaming floor, each stripe a spotlight on the dust motes twirling in the air. Fingers tinted beneath his chin, his focus drifted past the window, his thoughts already grappling with the complexities looming in the upcoming meeting. Moscow beckoned. Tomorrow. The invitation had arrived, laced with anticipation. He surmised that President Putin was intrigued, perhaps even amused, by the brash, youthful revolutionary from Burkina Faso. Traore was no fool. He understood his nation's geopolitical weight, its subterranean riches, and Russia's expanding footprint in the Sahel. But he also held firm to his convictions, his singular vision for Burkina Faso. He picked up a small, exquisitely carved ebony elephant from his desk, a gift offered by a village elder from the northern reaches. Its coarse surface tethered him, a tangible link to the people he served, their visages scored with trial and hope. He shut his eyes, and a memory blossomed, vivid as a lightning flash. He was a boy, no more than 10, settled at the feet of his grandmother, Fatima Diallo. The atmosphere inside their modest village dwelling hung heavy with the aroma of burning wood and shea butter. Fatima, her countenance a tapestry of lines etched by sun and the passage of time, was diligently weaving a basket from river reeds. Her hands, toughened and strong, danced with seasoned dexterity. "Grandmother," he'd inquired, his voice brimming with youthful impatience, "why the same pattern always? Why not try something new? Something different?" Fatima paused, her gaze meeting his, radiating a warmth that consistently settled his spirit. "Ibrahim," she said gently, her voice a soft murmur, "a resilient basket rests upon a sturdy base. Our heritage, traditions, serve as that foundation. We can introduce new fibers, diverse hues, but we must never discard that which binds us." She then indicated a small imperfection in the weave, an errant strand, slightly askew. "See this? Even the most minor blemish can compromise the basket's integrity. Each thread matters. Every deed, every utterance holds weight." He recalled, frowning, wrestling with the concept. Fatima smiled, a gradual, serene unveiling of her lips. "Patience, child. Wisdom isn't solely gleaned from pages, but from living, from observing, heeding, feeling the soil beneath your soles." Then, she took his small hand in hers, her touch surprisingly firm. "Remember this, Ibrahim. True strength lies not in clamor, but in quiet endurance. It resides in maintaining your dignity, even when the world seeks to suppress you. It is in treating each individual with respect, irregardless of their status. For in the eyes of the Almighty, we are all created equal." The memory receded, bestowing upon Traore a revitalized sense of resolve. He opened his eyes, the sunlight now seeming to possess a sharper brilliance. He was acutely aware that the world beyond was intricate and often unforgiving, a realm where dominance and avarice frequently eclipsed basic human kindness. Yet he was equally cognizant that the values Fatima had ingrained in him served as his guiding star, his moral compass. He cast his gaze upon the itinerary for his Moscow sojourn, a schedule of formal engagements, state banquets, and press briefings. The conventional diplomatic minuet. He felt a wave of weariness wash over him, a yearning for the simplicity of his village, the authentic faces of his people. He reached for his mobile phone and contacted his chief of staff, Captain Dembele. "Dembele," he stated, his voice even and modulated, "I desire to journey to Moscow discreetly. Eschew the pomp, forgo the motorcade. Secure a seat on a commercial flight. Economy class." Dembele stammered in protest. "Mr. President, with the utmost respect, this deviates sharply from protocol. Your security, My security rests in the hands of destiny, Traore interjected softly. And in the capable hands of the Russian security apparatus, I trust. I aspire to experience the city as any ordinary traveler. I desire to witness it firsthand, unburdened by the shielded confines of a limousine. Silence hung on the line. Traore could practically perceive Dembele scrambling for a suitable counterargument. Ultimately, the captain sighed. As you wish, Mr. President. However, I must insist on a security contingent. Understated, naturally. Agreed, Traore replied with a subtle smile. He knew Dembele would never permit him to travel completely unattended. Simply ensure they remain inconspicuous. No sweets, no sunglasses, denim and plain shirts. He concluded the call and leaned back in his chair. A standard flight, denim and a simple shirt. It was a modest gesture of defiance, a subdued assertion of his inherent humanity. He wished to see Moscow, undoubtedly, but he also desired to be seen, not as President Traore, the leader of a small African nation, but as Ibrahim, a man traversing the globe, seeking knowledge and understanding. He understood the inherent risks. He knew that traveling incognito could expose him to vulnerabilities absent within the protective shell of officialdom. But he also held the conviction that genuine leadership necessitated empathy, a willingness to venture beyond the marble halls of authority and connect with humanity on a fundamental level. He rose and walked towards the window, observing the bustling city. The sun was commencing its descent towards the horizon, painting the rooftops with elongated shadows. The air retained its warmth, yet bore a hint of coolness on the breeze, a promise of the approaching twilight. Tomorrow, Moscow. He couldn't predict what awaited him, but he knew he would meet it with the same steadfast strength and unwavering determination Fatima had nurtured in him so many years prior. He would carry the very essence of Burkina Faso within him, irrespective of his destination. A secret journey to Moscow. The biting Moscow wind slapped Ibrahim Traore awake as he stepped off the plane. It was a different cold than he knew in Ouagadougou, a damp, bone-deep chill that seeped through his simple wool coat. He pulled his scarf higher, trying to disappear further into the anonymity he craved. The airport teemed with people, a swirling mix of languages and faces, all rushing with the singular purpose of reaching their destinations. He was just another face in the crowd, and that was exactly what he wanted. He bypassed the VIP greeting area, his security detail a discreet distance behind, pretending to be ordinary travelers. He needed to feel the pulse of this city to understand the ground on which he would be standing when he met with Putin. The grand pronouncements and diplomatic niceties would come later. Now, he wanted the truth, unfiltered and raw. Outside, the scene was a symphony of exhaust fumes and shouted negotiations. Snow, already blackened by the city, crunched underfoot. He raised his hand to hail a taxi, a battered Lada screeching to a halt in front of him. "Where to, friend?" the driver grunted, his breath clouding the frigid air. The man was thick-set, with a ruddy face and eyes that seemed perpetually narrowed in suspicion. A cigarette dangled from his lips, its ash threatening to spill onto his stained jacket. "Near the Kremlin," Traore replied, in careful French, hoping the driver understood. The driver, whose name was Dmitry Volkov, according to the laminated license displayed haphazardly on the dashboard, eyed him with open disdain. "Kremlin, eh? Tourist are we? Or something else?" He spat a glob of phlegm onto the slushy street. "Speak Russian?" "Unfortunately, no," Traore answered calmly. Volkov scoffed. "Figures. Probably some student. Or worse." He muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a racial slur. Traore clenched his jaw but remained silent. He wouldn't be baited. Not yet. The drive was a jarring experience. Volkov drove with a recklessness that bordered on suicidal, weaving through traffic and cursing at other drivers in a torrent of Russian invective. The buildings blurred past, imposing Stalinist structures of gray stone, interspersed with glittering, modern glass towers. The city was a study in contrasts, a tangible representation of its complex history. Cold enough for you, comrade, Volkov sneered, glancing at Traore in the rearview mirror. Welcome to the real Russia. Traore simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the passing cityscape. The Kremlin was a silent, watchful presence in the distance, its golden domes gleaming even under the dull sky. It felt both ancient and powerful, a symbol of enduring strength. As they neared the Kremlin, Volkov's driving grew even more erratic. He seemed determined to make the journey as unpleasant as possible. Finally, he slammed on the brakes, nearly throwing Traore into the dashboard. "Here's your Kremlin," he announced, pointing to the imposing walls. "That'll be 10,000 rubles." Traore raised an eyebrow. The fare was exorbitant, clearly inflated for a foreigner. He pulled out his wallet, deliberately counting out the bills. "Slow are we?" Volkov snapped, his face reddening. "Maybe you Africans are all the same, stupid and slow." That was the line. Traore's calm facade cracked. "That is uncalled for," he said, his voice low and steady. Volkov jumped out of the car, his bulk filling Traore's vision. "What's that? You got a problem with the truth?" He shoved Traore roughly. Traore stumbled back, his hand instinctively moving to defend himself. It was a mistake. Volkov roared and swung a fist, catching Traore on the cheek. Pain exploded behind his eye. Before Traore could react, two figures in dark suits materialized from seemingly nowhere, grabbing Volkov by the arms. Kremlin guards. They had been watching, waiting for the situation to escalate. "Do you know who this is?" One of the guards barked at Volkov, his voice like ice. Volkov, suddenly pale, stammered, I just thought he was—" The guard cut him off. "This is President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso." The color drained completely from Volkov's face. He looked from the grim-faced guards to the calm, unreadable expression on Traore's face. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. He knew he was in deep trouble. The grumpy taxi driver, Dmitry Volkov, flicked a husk onto the dashboard's web of cracks. "Another ruble, another ache," he grumbled, adjusting the mirror to confront the receding hairline that signaled his own slow decline. 2 hours he'd idled outside Sheremetyevo, the Moscow wind a frigid serpent slithering through the Lada's rusted seams, mocking the heater's asthmatic puffs. The sallow-skinned man who finally approached radiated an unassuming calm that belied any importance. Just another gawker, ready to snap photos of St. Basil's and gripe about the rot-gut vodka, he figured. "Where to, comrade?" Dmitry rasped, his greeting a threadbare courtesy. Foreigners could decipher basic directions or compensate him for the inconvenience of translation. The man offered a precise address near the Kremlin. Dmitry grunted, manhandling the gear shift. "Fancy neighborhood. Important business." The man's gaze drifted to the window, fixed on the streaking panorama of concrete and frosted trees. His silence was a goad. Dmitry preferred either chatty Cathys or open-handed tippers. This one simply occupied space, a quiet shadow in the cramped cabin. Dmitry launched into a harangue about fuel prices, the city council's ineptitude, and the motherland's overall slide into decay. Every grievance was punctuated with a theatrical sigh and a furtive glance in the mirror, a transparent fishing expedition for a rise. Still nothing. Dmitry drawled, thick with sarcasm, back in Soviet times, things meant something. Discipline. Respect. Now, just a flood of outsiders, pinching our jobs, diluting our traditions. He risked another peep. The man's face remained a mask, unyielding. The Lada shuddered violently as Dmitry dodged a pothole large enough to swallow a small dog. He cursed under his breath. "This tin can, always something kaput. You wouldn't get it. Probably cruises around in some German luxury sedan back in. Where are you from, anyway?" He snorted derisively. "Some third-world backwater, I'd wager." A muscle pulsed in the man's temple. Dmitry caught it, a fleeting flicker of vexation, piercing the stoicism. Emboldened, Dmitry poured it on. "Here to pillage our resources, I suppose? That's the typical play. Siphon off Russia's wealth, then leave us bled dry. He wrestled a cigarette from a ravaged pack and lit it, the sharp tang of tobacco smoke thickening the already stale air. He offered none to his passenger. The man's voice, when it came, was low but edged with steel. "Perhaps," he suggested, "you should concentrate on the road." Dmitri scoffed. "Drive? I've navigated these streets since before you sprouted. I know every rut, every shortcut, every corrupt pig looking for a handout." He sucked greedily on his cigarette, exhaling a plume towards the back seat. A subtle cough was his only reply. Dmitri ignored it, riding a wave of accumulated bitterness and a potent sense of victimhood. "Think you're superior, don't you?" Dmitri sneered. "With your expensive threads and your urgent affairs. Think you could just waltz in here and trample all over us?" He slammed on the brakes as a stray dog risked a dash across the avenue. The man pitched forward, his forehead connecting with the unforgiving plastic of the headrest. "Hey, watch it," Dmitri barked, twisting in his seat. "Got a problem with my driving skills?" The man massaged his brow, eyes narrowed to slits. "I have a problem with your disposition," he stated, his tone laced with menace. "My disposition? What's wrong with my disposition? I'm just calling it as I see it. This is MY land, and I'll speak my mind." Dmitri fumbled for another cigarette, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. Abruptly, the car slewed sideways. Dmitri, blinded by his rant, had strayed into oncoming traffic. A horn blasted from an approaching truck, a deafening, apocalyptic bellow. He wrenched the wheel, averting a head-on collision by mere inches. He unleashed a string of profanities, his face hot with fury and adrenaline. "Damn it, see what you made me do." The man remained mute, his gaze boring into Dmitri. The silence crackled with unspoken antagonism. Dmitri felt the pressure of the man's stare, a tangible weight that chipped away at his bravado. "Think you're so tough, huh?" Dmitri spat, twisting fully to confront his passenger. The car drifted perilously close to the curb. That's when a jolt of exquisite pain detonated at the base of his skull, accompanied by an explosion of white light. He yelped, momentarily surrendering control of the steering wheel. The Lada veered wildly, arcing towards a looming lamppost. Then shadow. Not the oblivion of unconsciousness, but the deep tint of the black SUVs that materialized around his taxi, barricading him in, obscuring his view. The SUV's doors swung open, and men in dark suits emerged, their expressions implacable. It was done. Words that sting. The screech of tires echoed in Traore's ears, a jarring counterpoint to the unsettling silence that had followed the arrival of the black SUVs. He was still reeling from the near miss, the image of the oncoming truck imprinted on his mind. Dmitri, however, was far from finished. "You think you're better than me, huh?" Dmitri spat, turning in his seat, his face contorted with rage. "Riding around in my taxi like you own the place? You people come here, take our jobs, suck the life out of Russia." Traore stared straight ahead, at the blurry cityscape rushing past. The Kremlin, he knew, was close. He had to remain composed. This was not how he envisioned his arrival in Moscow. "You sit there like a stone," Dmitri continued, his voice rising. "Probably don't even speak Russian. Just another leech looking for a handout." He punctuated his words with aggressive gestures, his hands flailing dangerously close to the steering wheel. Traore's jaw tightened. The words were crude, laced with a venom that surprised him. He had expected suspicion, perhaps even a degree of coldness. But this raw, unfiltered hatred felt like a physical blow. He focused on his breathing, trying to find a center of calm amidst the storm raging within the cramped taxi. He remembered Fatima, his grandmother, her face etched with the wisdom of generations. "Ibrahim," she had said, her voice a low, comforting rumble, "the world will throw stones at you. Some will be sharp, some will be heavy. But remember, it is not the stones themselves that matter, but how you carry them." Dmitri's tirade continued, a relentless barrage of insults and accusations. He ranted about corruption, about the decline of Russian society, about the perceived injustices that fueled his bitterness. His words painted a bleak picture, a landscape of despair and resentment. Traore could feel the heat rising in his chest, the instinctive urge to retaliate, to defend himself, to silence this man. But Fatima's words echoed in his mind, a gentle reminder of the strength that lay in restraint. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing her wrinkled hands, the warmth of her embrace. "You think you're so important, sitting there in your fancy suit," Dmitri sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Probably a criminal, hiding from the law. Or worse, a politician." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that scraped against Traore's nerves. Traore opened his eyes. He saw Dimitri's face reflected in the rearview mirror, twisted with malice. The taxi swerved slightly, Dimitri's control faltering under the weight of his anger. Traore gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles white. He thought of the upcoming meeting with Putin, the delicate negotiations, the hopes of forging a stronger partnership between Burkina Faso and Russia. He couldn't afford to be distracted by this petty conflict. He had a responsibility to his people, a duty to represent them with dignity and strength. "Silence," Dmitri bellowed, slamming his fist against the dashboard. "You think you can ignore me? You think I'm just some peasant you can walk all over?" The force of the blow sent the taxi veering sharply to the right. Traore braced himself, his body tense. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the primal instinct to protect himself. He looked at Dmitri, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and something else, fear. Dmitri was a broken man, consumed by his own demons. And in that moment, Traore felt a flicker of pity for him. But pity would not solve the situation. He needed to regain control, to diffuse the tension before it escalated further. He opened his mouth to speak, to reason with Dmitri, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could utter a sound, the black SUVs that had appeared after the near miss roared ahead, boxing the taxi in front and behind. The taxi lurched to a halt, throwing Traore forward. Doors of the SUVs burst open, and men in dark suits swarmed the taxi. The moment of reckoning had arrived. A shocking push. The black SUVs hemmed them in, metal behemoths breathing down the taxi's neck. Dmitri, face contorted with a rage that seemed disproportionate even to his earlier venom, slammed the gear shift into park with unnecessary force. The engine sputtered, then died. "Get out," he snarled, the Russian words thick with spittle. Traore, still processing the sudden appearance of the SUVs and the abrupt escalation of Dimitri's anger, didn't move. He was caught between the instinct to assert his authority, to demand an explanation, and the lingering echo of his grandmother's counsel. "Choose your battles, little lion." This was not a battle he needed to win, not here, not now. "I said get out." Dmitri punctuated the command with a shove. It wasn't a playful nudge. It was a deliberate, forceful push against Traore's shoulder. The unexpectedness of it caught him off guard. He hadn't anticipated physical violence. Traore stumbled back, his hand instinctively reaching for the door handle to steady himself. The cheap plastic felt flimsy, inadequate against the force of Dimitri's aggression. He felt a sharp, unfamiliar sting of humiliation. He was a soldier, a president, used to command and respect, not this blatant disrespect. His carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. He forced himself to breathe, focusing on the cold air that rushed into his lungs. The scent of exhaust fumes and something vaguely metallic filled his nostrils. He needed to remain calm, to assess the situation. The SUVs, Dimitri's unhinged rage. It all felt staged. He managed to regain his footing, his back pressed against the cold metal of the taxi door. Dmitri was out of the car now, looming over him, his face flushed and contorted. Dimitri's breath reeked of cheap cigarettes and something sour, something fermented. "You think you're better than me, huh?" Dmitri spat, his voice raw. "Coming here, thinking you can just take what you want." Traore remained silent, his eyes narrowed, studying Dmitri. The man was clearly deranged, fueled by some deep-seated resentment. But there's something else there, something akin to fear? Was he being manipulated? Before Traore could formulate a response, one of the SUV's doors swung open with a heavy thud. Two men in dark suits emerged, their faces impassive, their movements precise. They moved with an unnerving efficiency, like well-oiled machines. Kremlin Guard. Dmitry seemed to deflate, his bravado instantly vanishing. He took a step back, his eyes wide with panic. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "What's going on here?" one of the guards demanded, his voice sharp and devoid of emotion. He spoke in perfect French, betraying his elite training. Dmitry stammered, He wouldn't pay the fare." It was a pathetic lie, and everyone knew it. The guard ignored him, his gaze fixed on Traore. "Mr. President, are you all right?" The question, spoken in French with a formal respect that was a stark contrast to Dmitry's earlier insults, was like a bucket of ice water. The anonymity he had so carefully sought was gone, shattered by Dmitry's actions and the timely arrival of the Kremlin Guards. Traore straightened his jacket, the simple act a deliberate assertion of his dignity. He met the guard's gaze, his own eyes calm and steady. "I am unharmed," he said, his voice even, "but I believe this man requires assistance." He gestured towards Dmitry, who was now trembling visibly. The guards moved swiftly, flanking Dmitry and effectively silencing him. The second guard spoke into a small radio, his words clipped and unintelligible. Traore took a step away from the taxi, putting some distance between himself and Dmitry. The events of the past few minutes replayed in his mind, a chaotic jumble of insults, aggression, and calculated intervention. He had come to Moscow seeking understanding, hoping to gain insight into the mind of Putin, but he had instead found himself confronted with a different, more insidious aspect of Russia, the simmering undercurrent of racism and xenophobia that permeated the society. He looked up at the imposing buildings that lined the street, their facades cold and impersonal. Moscow was a city of secrets, a city of power, and a city where even a president could find himself vulnerable. The Kremlin arrives. A screech of tires shattered the stillness of the night. A wash of intense light flooded the chaotic tableau beside the taxi, as two predatory black sedans roared to a halt, boxing in the scene. Red and blue strobes pulsed, casting an erratic, theatrical glow across the snow-dusted asphalt. Doors flew open. Figures clad in dark, substantial coats emerged, their expressions unyielding, their movements honed. Each step radiated an aura of unquestionable authority. Anya appeared from the lead vehicle, her professional composure shattered, replaced by stark disbelief. Ignoring the escort, she hurried forward, her boots crunching on the icy ground, a hand flying to her mouth to suppress a gasp of shock. "Stop! That's enough!" Her voice, usually a model of control, quivered slightly. The guards closing in on Dmitry faltered. Her eyes flew between Dmitry's flushed, enraged face and the disheveled figure slumped against the taxi. A man she now recognized with sickening clarity despite the dim light and rumpled attire. It was him, President Traore. Here, like this. Her training momentarily abandoned, she rushed to his side. "Mr. President, are you hurt? Are you all right?" She knelt beside him, her gloved hand hovering tentatively, awaiting his acknowledgement. Ibrahim Traore straightened, a slight grimace betraying discomfort. He dismissed her concern with a weary wave. "I am quite unharmed, mademoiselle. Petrova, is it?" Anya's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew her? Even amidst this chaos, this humiliating spectacle, his presence of mind remained intact. Her respect intensified. "Yes, Mr. President. This is utterly unacceptable. I can only apologize." A hulking guard, his face etched with granite-like severity, stepped forward. "Officer Petrova, stand down. We will handle this." Anya rose, her initial shock crystallizing into a spark of defiance. "With respect, Captain Volkov, this situation demands a certain finesse." She shot a glare at Dmitry, now struggling in the grip of two guards, his protests a jumble of slurred imprecations. He assaulted the president of Burkina Faso. Finesse is irrelevant. He's going into custody. Volkov's tone was clipped, final. But, Captain, Anya hesitated. Something felt wrong, fundamentally wrong. The driver's fury seemed inflated, almost staged. And the timing? The security team's arrival felt too orchestrated, too perfectly timed. Perhaps we should fully investigate before. Volkov dismissed her with a curt gesture. The details are clear, officer. The man's a xenophobic goon. End of story. He addressed Traore. Mr. President, please accept our deepest apologies for this regrettable incident. You'll be brought to justice, we assure you. Traore observed Volkov with quiet intensity. Justice is paramount, Captain, but so too is understanding. Discover why this man felt compelled to attack me before you pass judgment. Volkov's expression remained fixed. Of course, Mr. President. A thorough inquiry will be conducted. He signaled the guards restraining Dmitri. Take him. As Dmitri was hauled toward the waiting sedans, he twisted his head, his gaze locking with Traore's. A fleeting emotion, fear, remorse, flickered across his features. He started to speak, but his words were lost in a choked cry as he was shoved into the vehicle. Anya watched them depart, a knot of disquiet twisting in her gut. The entire event felt artificial, too efficient. Traore turned to her, his expression inscrutable. Mademoiselle Petrova, I would be grateful if you ensured this man receives fair treatment. He may be misguided, but he deserves to be treated as a human being. Anya met his gaze, her resolve firming. I will do everything within my power, Mr. President. You have my word. The black sedans, their lights still flashing, sped away, leaving Anya and President Traore alone on the snow-covered street. The silence descended, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant urban thrum. Mr. President, Anya began tentatively, is there somewhere I can escort you? Somewhere safe, where you might rest. Traore offered a faint smile, a hint of wry amusement in his eyes. Mademoiselle Petrova, after recent events, almost anywhere would be an improvement. Identity revealed. The holding cell reeked, stale tobacco clinging to the sterile scent of disinfectant. Dmitri Volkov, deflated, slumped on the hard bench, the boisterous defiance that had driven his earlier actions now completely gone. The silence was a tangible weight, far heavier than the steel door. The incident replayed in a loop in his mind, each shouted insult, each forceful push amplified by the stark reality of his predicament. He dismissed the man as just another entitled tourist, a forgettable face in Moscow's constant throng. But now, a throbbing ache pulsed behind his eyes, the painful bloom of awareness. Anya Petrova's key scraped in the lock, the sound magnified within the confined space. She stood silhouetted in the entrance, her features set in professional composure, though Dmitri detected something else lurking there. Incredulity, perhaps a shadow of compassion. Volkov, she announced, her tone sharp and precise. President Traore has identified you as his attacker. Dmitri could only stare, his jaw slack. The title, delivered so plainly, struck him like a physical blow. President of Burkina Faso. The man he'd accosted was a head of state. A wave of nausea surged through him. He gulped, struggling to find his voice. The president, he managed, his voice a hoarse rasp. Anya affirmed with a nod, her expression impassive. Do you contest the charges? Contest? How could he? The security footage, the ever-present guards, the sheer imperturbability of the man he'd attacked. It all coalesced into a devastating whole. He shook his head, resigned. No, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. I don't contest it. Why? Anya pressed, stepping inside. She dragged a metal chair closer and sat, her eyes unwavering. Why did you assault him? Dmitri raked a hand through his lank hair, the motion a blend of mortification and lingering anger. He yearned to lash out, to place blame anywhere but on himself, but the words died in his throat. He couldn't voice the years of pent-up frustrations, the feeling of abandonment, the resentment that had poisoned his spirit. He was disrespectful, Dmitri stammered, the excuse flimsy even to his own ears. He acted like he owned the entire city. Anya's gaze sharpened. Respect? You showed respect by shoving him and hurling racial epithets? Is that your warped definition of respect, Volkov? She paused, letting her rebuke resonate. He is a guest here. He is owed respect, irregardless of his origin. She leaned forward, her tone softening ever so slightly. Do you comprehend the implications of what you've done? This is not some drunken brawl. This is an international crisis in the making. Dmitri remained silent. He understood all too well. His life, already precarious, was now fractured beyond repair. Meanwhile, in an adjacent room, small and utilitarian, President Traore sat composed, taking small sips of water. His bespoke suit, flawless only moments prior, now bore a faint smudge on the sleeve, the ghostly outline of a hand. He watched the interrogation unfold through a one-way mirror, his expression inscrutable. The chief of security, a stout man with a chronically worried face, paced with agitated energy. Mr. President, he stammered, we're working tirelessly to contain this situation. The media, the story is exploding. Traore raised a hand, silencing the man. Containing the story is secondary, he said, his voice calm and deliberate. Justice is my priority. He observed Anya questioning Dmitri, her face displaying a tenacity that surprised him. He noticed a glint of genuine empathy in her eyes, a desire to comprehend, to act justly. It was insignificant, yet offered a glimmer of optimism. That officer, he said, indicating Anya. She appears earnest. The chief of security scoffed derisively. Petrova? She's green, Mr. President. Anxious to make a good impression. Traore offered a slight smile. Perhaps, or perhaps she possesses something more valuable than careerism, integrity. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. Ensure this investigation is exhaustive and fair. I demand the unvarnished truth. His gaze returned to the one-way mirror fixed on Dmitri, and I wish him to grasp the magnitude of his choices. He pivoted away from the mirror, his face etched with weariness, but firm in resolve. But beyond that, he murmured, almost to himself, I want him to comprehend the humanity he denied. News travels fast. The digital sphere erupted. In mere moments, shaky footage, a smartphone recording of the squabble, the push, the sudden appearance of Kremlin guards, went viral. Initially wary, news outlets pivoted, racing to confirm the scandalous claims. Confirmation arrived with a photograph. President Traore, looking drawn but dignified, inside a police vehicle. African leader attacked in Moscow, Al Jazeera announced. Le Monde questionnait Traoré incident, a brewing diplomatique storm. The BBC ran a live-updating blog, charting global reactions. The event swallowed the news cycle, dwarfing debates on fiscal reform. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, the response was instant and raw. Crowds amassed, bewilderment yielding to incandescent anger as details emerged. Initial disbelief gave way to a surge of national fervor tinged with outrage. Market vendors, their colorful textiles clashing with the grim images projected from nearby screens, began to intone Traore's name. Students flooded from the university gates, brandishing Burkinabe flags, demanding retribution. Do they believe they can treat us with such contempt? One young man roared, voice cracking. That our president is just another anonymous face? They will soon learn otherwise. The fury was palpable, underpinned by something deeper. A fierce loyalty to their president, the man who had promised them global respect. Many felt as if the insult aimed at Traore had struck them personally. Inside the stark confinement of his cell, Dmitri Volkov perched on the edge of his narrow bed, eyes fixed on the soiled floor. The initial shock ebbed, replaced by a heavy sense of finality. Perhaps for the first time, he grasped the enormity of his actions. Not merely the assault itself, but the fallout, the international repercussions. He envisioned his mother, her face a portrait of disappointment, and shame engulfed him. He had disgraced himself, his family, and, in a sense, his nation. Outside, Anya Petrova endlessly refreshed her phone, her expression troubled. The sheer volume of reports was crushing. Analysts were already dissecting the occurrence, spinning theories from a casual hate crime to calculated provocation. She struggled to reconcile the image of the repentant, almost wretched, figure in the cell with the global conflagration he had sparked. Her phone shrilled, the Kremlin press office insignia flashing. She sighed, bracing herself for another battery of questions and demands. The news reached President Putin as he prepared for his daily briefing. His initial reaction was incredulity, superseded by swift, decisive action. He immediately summoned his foreign minister and the director of the FSB. The implications of this event, regardless of its genesis, were too critical to overlook. "This is intolerable," Putin stated, his tone glacial. "An apology is insufficient. We must assure President Traore that this was an isolated incident, a reprehensible act that does not reflect the essence of the Russian spirit." He dictated a personal letter of apology to President Traore, conveying his profound regret and pledging full cooperation in the inquiry. He also mandated a comprehensive investigation into the circumstances surrounding the incident, demanding to know if there were clues of planning or external influence. While the official declaration stressed regret and cooperation, a discreet directive was issued: scrutinize the taxi company, Volkov's history, and any possible connections to subversive elements. Word of Putin's apology, conveyed via diplomatic channels, was swiftly released to the press, a strategic maneuver to limit the damage. It was a beginning, but Anya understood that the path to mending the now fragile bond between the two countries would be steep and long. And caught in the vortex was Dmitry Volkov, a symbol of something far grander, imprisoned in a cell, facing the repercussions of a moment of uncontrolled fury. A lesson in dignity. The hotel room, impersonal and bland, felt like confinement. Traore traversed the space, the thick carpet absorbing the sound of his restless movements. Beyond the walls lay Moscow, a city unseen, rendered infamous by a single, stinging slur and the crushing weight of international scrutiny. He paused before the mirror, confronting a reflection etched with weariness, aged beyond his years. His fingers brushed the tender swelling near his eye, a tangible mark of the offense. Yet it was the deeper affront, the wound inflicted upon his nation, his people, that truly throbbed. Turning abruptly, he snatched up Anya's painstakingly crafted notes, diplomatic platitudes, carefully chosen to smooth, ruffled feathers. He crushed them in his fist. This transcended mere diplomacy. It touched something far more fundamental. Authenticity was paramount. Settling at the small desk, he watched city lights paint luminous trails across the windowpane. He began to draft his own response, slowly at first, then with accelerating fervor. Words poured forth, a cascade of thoughts and emotions crystallized into a message of hope and resilience. He articulated the essence of dignity, not as a bulwark against insult, but as an intrinsic strength impervious to theft. He explored respect, not as an entitlement to be demanded, but as a freely bestowed offering. He championed Burkina Faso, not as a diminutive, struggling nation, but as a radiant emblem of pride and self-determination. Hours drifted by. Exhausted but resolute, he reviewed his address. It was unvarnished, sincere, undeniably African. A calculated risk, a departure from the cautious pronouncements expected of a head of state. But it resonated with his very core. The following dawn, the world held its breath. The press conference unfolded in the hotel's opulent ballroom, chandeliers casting a stark glare upon the scene. Traore stood firm, his gaze unwavering. The room pulsed with journalists, diplomats, and security, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging in the air. He commenced his address, his tone measured and assured, yet infused with an understated strength. My brothers and sisters, citizens of the world, he began, his French accent pronounced but readily understood. I stand before you not as a casualty, but as a living embodiment of Africa's enduring spirit. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled throng. What transpired in Moscow was an act of ignorance, steeped in prejudice and animosity. It was a feeble attempt to belittle me, to rob me of my inherent worth. But I will not allow it to define me. I will not allow it to define us. He expounded on the paramount importance of understanding, of bridging the chasms that divide humanity. He stressed the necessity of empathy, of recognizing the shared humanity in others, irrespective of race, creed, or origin. We are all children of this planet, he declared, his voice imbued with growing passion. We all harbor similar aspirations, similar dreams, similar anxieties. We must cultivate the ability to perceive one another as kin, not adversaries. Turning his attention to the people of Burkina Faso, his tone softened with affection. My beloved countrymen, I am aware of your anger. I am aware of your pain. But I implore you to resist the urge to retaliate with animosity. Let us respond with grace, with compassion, with insight. Let us demonstrate to the world the authentic character of Burkina Faso. He emphasized the pivotal role of education, of dismantling the stereotypes and biases that fuel racism and discrimination. He underscored the necessity of justice, of holding perpetrators of hate accountable for their transgressions. Justice is not about vengeance, he stated, his voice unwavering. It is about restoration. It is about ensuring the non-recurrence of such acts. He concluded his address with a message of optimism. I believe in the indomitable power of the human spirit to triumph over adversity. I believe in the transformative power of love to vanquish hate. I believe in the unifying power of solidarity to forge a better world. Let us not be shackled by the shadows of the past. Let us be guided by the beacon of the future. Let us create a world where dignity is honored, where equality is treasured, and where peace reigns supreme. A profound silence descended upon the room. Then, gradually at first, applause resounded, swelling in intensity until it reverberated throughout the ballroom. Traore stood tall, his heart buoyant with hope. He had transformed a moment of degradation into a potent lesson in dignity, a lesson the world desperately needed to internalize. Forgiveness and hope. Dmitry Volkov was a study in dejection, his form slumped over the rough-hewn table, a single bulb painting his cell in grotesque chiaroscuro. The stale air, a cloying blend of antiseptic and despair, seemed to weigh him down. He gnawed on the cap of a ballpoint, its acrid taste mirroring the bile rising in his throat. The prison's raucous symphony, shouts colliding with the clang of steel doors, the mournful sigh of aged metal, only amplified his crushing guilt. He'd been granted the chance, a pen and paper, to address the man he'd so deeply wronged, President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, a man he'd previously relegated to the periphery of news reports, a faceless figure from a distant land. Now, Traore's presence, dignified even in the face of Dimitri's malice, burned in his memory. How could he explain the indefensible? How to even begin to articulate the depth of his remorse? The venomous anger, born of ignorance, now seemed infantile, ludicrous. Words felt ponderous, inadequate. He started, "President Traore," then scratched it out. Too stiff. "Dear Mr. President," followed, only to be rejected as too familiar. Finally, simply, "Ibrahim Traore." The pen paused, suspended above the page. "I am writing from a pit of shame. My actions were beyond absolution. There is no justification. I was wrong, catastrophically so. Driven by prejudice and devoid of reason, I offer my sincerest apologies for the pain and dishonor I inflicted." He continued, the words flowing like a poisoned spring, each drop a testament to his regret. He wrote of his family, his wife and children, who now regarded him with a heartbreaking mix of apprehension and disappointment. He wrote of the shame that consumed him, the stain he'd left on his nation's reputation, reinforcing the very prejudices he should have battled. He dared to express the faint hope that he might, one day, begin to redeem himself. Letter completed. His hand trembled as he sealed it in the provided envelope, his name and prisoner identification number stark against the paper. He offered it to the guard, eyes fixed on the floor. Forgiveness was beyond expectation. He only dared aspire to understanding. Days crawled by until Anya arrived, bearing not a letter, but a transcript of a public statement from President Traore. She deposited it on the table, her face an impassive mask. His heart hammered as Dmitri seized the paper. "I have received Mr. Volkov's apology," the statement began. "While his actions were undeniably grievous, I maintain faith in the transformative power of forgiveness. Clinging to animosity only propagates the cycle of hate. I accept his apology, not for his benefit, but for the sake of progress and reconciliation. It is my hope that this incident serves as an awakening, a reminder of our shared humanity, our interconnectedness, and the inherent dignity of every individual." Dmitri devoured the words, tears blurring his vision. Forgiveness, an undeserved gift, extended nonetheless. A fragile ember of hope sparked in the oppressive darkness. Simultaneously, in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, the atmosphere vibrated with expectancy. The city, transformed by a riot of color, displayed banners featuring President Traore, interspersed with the vibrant hues of the Burkinabe and African Union flags. News of the incident in Moscow had swept through the nation like a brush fire, initially igniting a blaze of outrage and condemnation. But the president's response, his unyielding grace, his resonating words, had reshaped the narrative. He had transcended the role of mere leader, becoming a potent symbol of resilience, a guiding light for a continent too often the target of scorn. A throng pulsed at the airport. Families had gathered, resplendent in their finest attire, waving flags and singing anthems. Journalists from across the globe jockeyed for position, eager to document his return. The presidential aircraft descended, touching down with a controlled grace. A palpable hush swept through the crowd as the door swung open. President Traore appeared, his face etched with fatigue, yet his eyes shone with unyielding resolve. He offered a measured acknowledgement, a subtle smile gracing his lips. The crowd erupted, releasing a tidal wave of cheers, applause, and ululations that reverberated through the air. People surged forward, desperate for a touch, a glimpse, a chance to convey their profound support. He was engulfed by well-wishers, their hands reaching out, their voices a chorus of gratitude. Making slow progress through the throng, he offered handshakes and words of encouragement. He entered the waiting open-top vehicle, and the motorcade began its stately procession through the city's arteries. The streets were canyons of humanity, stretching as far as the eye could reach. They brandished flags, chanted his name, and showered the motorcade with a cascade of blossoms. He stood erect, his gaze fixed on the horizon, a leader returning not in defeat, but in triumph. He had stared down prejudice and enmity, emerging stronger, more determined than ever to forge a brighter future for his people, rooted in justice, equality, and mutual regard. As he passed, he noticed a young boy, barely 10, holding aloft a sign, Hope. Traore smiled. The future, it seemed, was in capable hands.